Most men lose their retirement savings to bad investments. I lost mine to a woman who didn't exist, and by the time I understood that, she'd already used my own name to bury me. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 64 years old. I own a modest lake house outside Traverse City, Michigan. I spent 31 years running a small hardware store before I sold it and retired, and until 9 days ago, I genuinely believed the second half of my life was going to be the good half. We'll get to that, but first, do me one favor, would you? If you're the type who listens all the way through without ever subscribing, go ahead and fix that now. Costs you nothing, means something to me. Hit like while you're there, and tell me what you think in the comments when we're done. You're going to want to stick around for this one. Now, let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Marilyn Hensley. Married 19 years, together for 22. She waters her orchids every Sunday morning without fail. She does the crossword in pen because she says pencil is for people who expect to be wrong, and she takes her tea black with a wedge of lime, which I always thought was strange and never once thought was suspicious. I knew this woman. I knew her, or I thought I did. This all started on a Wednesday in October, which in Michigan means the lake is already starting to look like it doesn't want you anymore. Marilyn was in Sarasota visiting her sister Pam. She'd been gone 4 days. I was living the retired man's version of a bachelor life. Frozen dinners, the History Channel at full volume, not shaving because nobody was around to notice. Content, honestly. Then the chimney started making a noise. Not the usual settling sound old houses make when the temperature drops. This was a scraping, a dragging, like something heavy being pulled across brick from the inside. I called the first chimney sweep company that had a decent rating online. A man named Curtis Boyle showed up an hour later. Curtis Boyle, out of Boyle's Hearth and Home. Quiet fellow, flannel shirt, carried his gear like a man who'd done this 10,000 times. "Let me get up there and take a look," Curtis said, heading for the ladder in the mudroom that led to our crawl space above the pantry, the one place in the house I hadn't been in years because there was nothing up there but old Christmas decorations. I told him to take his time. I made coffee. I watched 20 minutes of a documentary about the Great Lakes shipwrecks, living the dream. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Curtis, who was currently somewhere above my pantry ceiling. "Mr. Hensley, there's a false wall back here behind the insulation. It's got a door in it. Someone's knocked twice from the inside." I laughed, actually laughed, out loud, alone in my kitchen. I typed back, "Curtis, there's no door up there, just boxes." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Sir, I'm looking right at it. There's a padlock on this side, and I just heard it again. 2 knocks." I set my coffee down. A padlock on the outside of a hidden door in my own attic space. I want you to sit with that detail the way I couldn't at the time, because a lock on the outside of a door isn't there to keep people from getting in. It's there to keep someone from getting out. That's not storage. That's containment. I was up that ladder before I'd even decided to move. Curtis was standing in the crawl space with his flashlight aimed at a section of wall that didn't match the rest. Cheap paneling nailed over what should have been open framing. The same paneling Marilyn had insisted we install 2 winters back when she said the insulation needed a finished look, which at the time struck me as an odd thing to care about in a crawl space nobody would ever see. Behind a loose section of that paneling was a door, real door, hollow core, painted the exact gray of the insulation, so if you didn't know to look, you'd walk right past it. One heavy padlock through a hasp, and from behind it, faint, a sound like knuckles against wood. Twice, then silence, then twice again. "Call 911, I told Curtis. "Way ahead of you," he said, already dialing. 2 sheriff's deputies made it out to the house in 11 minutes, this being the kind of rural county where that counts as fast. I stood in my own crawl space feeling like I'd wandered into somebody else's life while they worked the bolt cutters on the lock. I texted Marilyn twice. "Something's happening at the house. Call me when you get this." Nothing back. Dinner with Pam, probably. I told myself that. A man needs something to tell himself in a moment like that. The door came open. The little room behind it, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, was empty. Swept clean. In fact, like somebody had gone through with a broom right before we got there. Bare plywood floor. A single work light. Unplugged. And sitting in the corner, a small speaker, the kind you'd charge on a nightstand, and next to it a flip phone, the cheap prepaid kind, its screen cracked clean across. The knocking had been a recording, on a loop, set off by remote. One of the deputies, a younger one named Deputy Ruiz, picked up the flip phone with a gloved hand and turned it over like he was reading a price tag. "This thing's been active in the last hour," he said. "Somebody set it going while your sweep was up here. I want you to sit with me in this next part, because this is where the floor of my whole life quietly gave out from under me without making a sound." Somebody knew Curtis Boyle was in my crawl space. Somebody waited until he got close to that wall, then triggered a recording built specifically to make a chimney sweep panic and text his client. Built specifically to get me to call the police. Built specifically to put 2 deputies inside a hidden room in my own house. That's not an accident. That's staging. And staging takes a director. They found the paperwork on the storage unit 3 days later. I couldn't tell you the precise moment it happened. The moment I stopped being the man whose house this was and started being the man they were building a file on, but it happens quiet, the way rot happens quiet. First, Deputy Ruiz is asking me routine questions on my own porch. Then a detective named Ellen Voss is sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a folder and a pen asking whether I'd ever rented a unit at a self-storage facility out on Garfield Road. I told her no. According to the paperwork, I had. Twice. Cash both times. My signature on the lease. When they opened that unit, they found a woman's suitcase, a prepaid card in my name with regular deposits going back years, and a photograph. A woman I had never laid eyes on in my life. Late 30s, reddish hair, laughing at whoever was holding the camera. No idea yet what that photograph would be used for. "Mr. Hensley," Detective Voss said, watching me the way you watch a man to see if his face agrees with his mouth. "This woman's been reported missing for 8 days. Her name is Denise Falk. You know her?" "No," I said. "Never seen her before in my life." And that was true. Completely true. But here's the part I didn't tell Detective Voss that night, because I needed to be by myself to understand what it meant. When I got home, I went straight upstairs to Marilyn's side of the closet, to the shelf where she keeps the paperback mysteries she rereads every winter, the ones with the cracked spines, the ones she never lets me touch, because she says I dog-ear the pages wrong. I went through them one at a time, and there she was. Denise Falk, tucked in the back cover of Marilyn's battered copy of a paperback about a woman who fakes her own death, smiling out at me from inside a book my wife had read maybe 30 times. I sat down on the floor of that closet, 64 years old, in the house I'd paid off 9 years early, holding a photograph of a missing woman my wife had hidden in plain sight the whole time, and I thought about all 22 years. Every anniversary trip, every Sunday with the orchids, every night I'd watched her read that exact paperback with her tea, black with lime, calm as still water. How long had Denise Falk been tucked inside that back cover? How long had Marilyn been building this? At 64, I figured the worst thing left for a man my age was a bad hip or a bad diagnosis. Turns out the worst thing is finding out the woman who slept next to you for 2 decades was never once actually there. If you've stuck with me this far, and you want more stories like this one, hitting subscribe really does help us keep making them. Thank you, truly. Here's something nobody warns you about when your own wife sets you up. The evidence isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is realizing the woman you built a life with was never confused, never overwhelmed, never just going through something. She was working, the entire time, on you. I need you to understand where my head was at this point. It had been 5 days since Curtis Boyle texted me from my own crawl space. 5 days since 2 deputies stood in a swept-clean room in my house looking at me like a man who needed watching. 5 days since Detective Ellen Voss started coming around, sometimes with questions, sometimes just parked at the end of my driveway in an unmarked sedan like I wouldn't clock it. I clocked it every time. I'm 64, not senile. Marilyn flew back from Sarasota the day after the crawl space business. I hadn't told her everything over the phone, just that something had happened at the house, and she needed to get home. When she walked in the door, she had the face of a woman who'd been worried sick the whole flight. Both hands on my cheeks, real tears, or tears that looked real, and at this point I'm not convinced there's a meaningful difference between the two. "Walter, what on earth happened? Are you all right?" And Lord help me, for the better part of an hour, I believed her. She cried when I showed her the crawl space. She held onto my sleeve while I walked her through the lock, the speaker, the flip phone. She said every right thing a frightened wife would say. Who would do this to us? Should we call someone? A lawyer, maybe? That last part. Should we call a lawyer? I thought that was fear talking. I understand now it was planning talking. The storage unit is what finally cracked her performance. Just for a second. When Detective Voss came back 4 days later and told us both about the unit on Garfield Road, I was watching Marilyn's face on purpose this time. Most people would have missed it. It lasted about half a second, this tiny stillness, like a picture on an old television freezing before it catches back up. Then the tears came right back on schedule. Someone is framing my husband, she said, gripping my hand across the table like we were a united front. This is obviously somebody setting him up. Detective Voss looked at her a long moment. Mrs. Hensley, how do you know it's obvious? Marilyn didn't even blink. Because I know my husband. I replayed that sentence probably 300 times over the next 2 days. She didn't say I'd never do something like this. She didn't say that's impossible. She said she knew me, which kept the whole conversation about certainty instead of character. That's a lawyer's sentence wearing a wife's voice. Here's where things start getting built, brick by brick. Stay with me on this part. I've got an old friend, Ray Kowalski, known him since we were both stocking shelves at the hardware store back before I owned it. Ray spent 30 years doing claims investigation for an insurance company, which means he's spent his whole working life learning how people build lies sturdy enough to stand up under weight. I called him on day 6 and told him everything start to finish. He didn't say anything for a long while. Walter, he finally said, how many accounts do you and Marilyn share? 2, checking, and a joint savings. Who runs them day to day? I opened my mouth and then shut it again because I already knew the answer felt wrong the second he asked it. Marilyn ran them. Had since about year 3, back when I mentioned I found the bill paying tedious and she offered to take it over. I hadn't given it a second thought since. Why would I? The bills got paid. The balance grew. Everything looked fine on paper. Pull every statement you've got, Ray said. Go back at least 6 years. I pulled 8. What I found didn't jump off the page at me, and that was the whole cleverness of it. No big withdrawals, no wire transfers to some account in another country, nothing a man would notice on a Tuesday night while half watching a ball game. Instead, there were small, patient, quiet movements. $80 here to an account I didn't recognize. A recurring charge to a business name I'd never heard of. A cash pull every few months, never big enough to raise a flag at the bank, always just under whatever threshold makes a teller ask questions. Over 8 years, it came to a little over $44,000. Moved so carefully, I never heard so much as a whisper of it. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning, staring at those numbers, and felt a specific kind of cold come over me. Not the cold of being scared, the cold of understanding scale. Because this wasn't a woman who snapped one bad year and did something desperate. The first odd transaction was dated 11 months after our wedding. She started this while we were still hanging pictures in our first house. 11 months in, Ray drove out the next morning and we spread it all across my dining room table. The bank records, the storage unit paperwork, the incident report, a timeline I'd scratched out on a legal pad at 3 in the morning. Ray studied it a long time without saying a word, which is his particular way of telling you that what he's looking at is worse than you're ready for. The storage unit, he said finally. Walk me through your phone that week. What do you mean? Where was your phone the night before that lease got signed? I thought about it. Charging on my nightstand. Same as every night. And Marilyn? In the bedroom. Same bedroom we'd shared for 19 years. I had never once thought of my own charging phone 6 inches from my sleeping wife as a vulnerability. She'd taken it while I slept, driven out to Garfield Road, signed my name on a lease. She'd watched me sign 100 times over the years, cash on the counter, back in bed with her breathing even before my alarm went off. I sat there trying to remember the morning after. Had she looked tired, off, anything? I couldn't remember. Because it was a Wednesday, and on Wednesdays I'm up at 6 for a hardware trade show call. kiss her on the head, grab my thermos, and I never once looked back at that bed. 22 years of never looking back. The chimney, Ray said quietly. I looked at him. You called the sweep the morning it started making noise. Cell phone or the house line? We haven't had a house line in a decade. Cell, I said. Pull your call log for that morning. I already knew before I looked. Some part of me had known since the moment Curtis texted me from the crawl space. I just hadn't let myself look at it head on yet. The call to Boyle's Hearth and Home went out from my number at 7:52 in the morning. I'd been at the diner with two other retired guys since 6:30, and I've got a receipt with a timestamp to prove it. Marilyn made that call. From my phone, taken again, or maybe she never gave it back the first time, to book a chimney sweep she knew would climb into that crawl space, find the paneling, find the door, hear the knocking, and text me in a panic. She'd built the entire opening act herself. The chimney noise, I still don't fully know how she managed it, but Ray suspects some kind of simple mechanical rig clipped near the flue liner, something small, something you could remove in 30 seconds. The hidden room, built or found and fitted out who knows how long ago. The speaker, the flip phone, the timing of the trigger, all of it set from Sarasota over dinner with her sister, one tap on some app while I sat at home eating leftovers and watching shipwreck documentaries. Walter, Ray said, and his voice dropped into that register men use right before they say something they wish they didn't have to. This isn't something a person throws together in a season. The money alone goes back 8 years. Building an identity, your name on things you never signed, that takes practice. She didn't just study you. He stopped. She got fluent in you. I stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the dock I'd rebuilt with my own 2 hands the summer we bought this place. The orchids Marilyn kept on the sill just inside that same window. The ones I'd hauled in every October for 2 decades, so the frost wouldn't get them. I'd been protecting her flowers while she built my coffin. At 64, I figured I had exactly 1 move left in me, and I hadn't told Ray about it yet, because the only way it worked was if Marilyn believed, completely and without a doubt, that her plan had already won. She needed to feel safe, just long enough for me to finish what I was building. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes over a man once he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous instead. I found that stillness on a Thursday morning at my kitchen table. Cold coffee in front of me and 8 years of bank statements spread out like a hand of cards, and I made a decision I have not lost 1 hour of sleep over since. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't confront Marilyn. I didn't take what Ray and I had found straight to Detective Voss. Because here's the thing about evidence. It only carries weight if the man handing it over still has any credibility left. And right then, as far as the county was concerned, I was a 64-year-old man whose signature was on a storage unit that had once held a missing woman's belongings. My word wasn't worth much at that moment. Marilyn had counted on that too. Of course she had. So I did the one thing she hadn't planned for. I stopped being predictable. First, I called my younger brother, Neil. Neil Hensley, 26 years on the county road crew before he retired, the kind of man who fixes his own truck, keeps 3 hunting rifles locked up proper, and has never once in his life panicked about anything worth panicking about. I drove out to his place near Cadillac on a Friday morning, told Marilyn I needed a few days to clear my head, and watched her face rearrange itself into exactly the right amount of loving concern. "Take whatever time you need, honey," she said. I nearly smiled driving away. At Neil's kitchen table, over black coffee and his wife's leftover meatloaf, I laid the whole thing out. The crawl space, the storage unit, the bank records, the phone logs, the photograph tucked in the back of that paperback. Neil listened without saying a word, which from him is the same as another man shouting in horror. When I finished, he sat quiet for a long stretch. "You said she's got a friend she talks to," he said. "Someone close." "Sharon," I said. "Sharon Dietz. Known each other since before Marilyn and I even met. Talk most weeks, sometimes twice. Phone or in person? Both. Sharon's down in Grand Rapids, visits 3-4 times a year, and they do these long calls, hour, 2 hours sometimes. Marilyn always takes them out on the sun porch, door shut." Neil nodded slow. "How long's it been since you put a listening device out on that sun porch?" I looked at him. He looked right back, dead serious. Neil, I said. I haven't. I know you haven't, he said, but you're fixing to. I want to be straight with you about something. I'm not a vengeful man by nature. I ran a hardware store for 3 decades and never once raised my voice at a customer, not even the difficult ones. I'm the guy at the 4th of July cookout making sure the kids get their hot dogs first. Vengeance isn't stitched into how I'm made, but I am an extraordinarily patient man, and patience is the only currency that actually pays out in a long game like this one. Neil ordered a small listening device off the internet, paid cash at a shipping store, had it sent to a P.O. box under a name that wasn't mine, the kind of quiet precision that a career on a county crew apparently just wires into a person permanently. I drove home Sunday, told Marilyn I was feeling more like myself, let her hold on to me in the doorway while I counted her heartbeat against my chest and felt absolutely nothing. That was the part that scared me most, honestly. Not rage, not grief, just a flat, clean quiet. I installed the device on a Tuesday afternoon while Marilyn was out getting her hair done. Small thing, wireless, tucked up behind a hanging fern on the sun porch that neither one of us had moved in 15 years. Took me maybe 3 minutes. Drove out to Neil's that evening, confirmed the feed was coming through clean on his laptop, drove home in time for dinner. Marilyn made pork chops, asked if I was feeling more like myself. Getting there, I told her. She smiled and topped off my glass of tea. I waited 16 days. 16 days of being Walter Hensley, devoted husband, cooperative old man, casual person of interest in a missing persons case. 16 days of answering Detective Voss's questions calm as you please, of letting Marilyn squeeze my hand in front of her, of watching my wife perform worry so smooth and convincing that even I had moments. Quick, disorienting moments where I wondered if grief had made me imagine this whole thing myself. Then on a Thursday evening in the third week, Sharon Dietz came up from Grand Rapids for a visit. I made myself scarce, told Marilyn I was heading to Ray's for the evening, kissed her cheek, and drove exactly 3 miles before I pulled off onto a gravel shoulder and opened my phone. The audio came through clean as a bell. They talked 20 minutes about nothing much. Sharon's grandkids, a casserole recipe, somebody's knee surgery. I almost talked myself into believing I'd planted a bug on my own sun porch chasing shadows Ray had put in my head. Then Marilyn's voice shifted. Subtle. The way a fiddler drops into a different key. Same hands, same instrument, everything else different. She got quieter, more exact. The warmth just drained right out of her the way water leaves a tub, slow and total. He hasn't got the faintest idea, Marilyn said. Sharon was quiet a beat. You're certain? He's out there mowing the lawn, bringing you your tea. Walter's exactly who he's always been, Marilyn said. He can't see past what's directly in front of his own nose. Never could. And the woman? Denise? Comfortable, Marilyn said. She agreed to stay gone 60 days. She's out in Scottsdale. I paid her enough that she'll keep her mouth shut. By the time those 60 days are up, Walter's going to be too buried under his own paperwork to matter. A pause. Marilyn. Sharon's voice went careful, unsure of itself. What actually happens to him? He becomes the answer to a question the sheriff's department is already asking, Marilyn said, simple as reading off a grocery list. They've got his name, his signature, his money trail. All I have to do is let it keep building on its own. Give it a few more weeks and it won't even need me pushing anymore. It'll have its own weight to it. And where will you be? Somewhere warm, Marilyn said. And then she laughed, loose, easy, the honest laugh of a woman who's watching something go exactly the way she drew it up. I sat in my truck on that gravel shoulder 3 miles from my own house, listening to my wife laugh about the architecture of ending me, and that same flat cold settled back over me, still and complete. I didn't call Neil. I didn't call Ray. I didn't call Detective Voss. Not yet. I want to tell you about Denise Falk, because she matters in this. 2 days after Sharon's visit, I hired a retired county detective named Gordon Pruitt, a friend of Ray's, the kind of man whose whole personality is a locked file cabinet. I gave Gordon one job: find Denise Falk. It took him 5 days. She was in Scottsdale exactly like Marilyn had said, holed up in a mid-range motel off Camelback, paying cash, checked in under a name that was almost but not quite her own. Gordon got photographs, got her talking on the record, got a notarized statement out of a woman who, it turned out, hadn't fully grasped what she'd agreed to, and had gotten a whole lot less comfortable with the arrangement now that a retired detective was sitting across the table from her, explaining what the word accessory meant in a court of law. Denise Falk wasn't a criminal. She was a woman who needed money bad enough to make a catastrophic choice. She gave Gordon everything: how Marilyn found her, what she'd paid her, how she'd been coached on staying out of sight for 60 days. She signed her statement with a shaking hand and cried for a good 10 minutes after, and Gordon sat there with her till she was done, because he's a decent man underneath that locked file cabinet exterior. I now had a recorded conversation off that sun porch, and a signed statement from a missing woman who was never actually missing. Two things Marilyn had no idea existed. Here's what I did not do. I didn't march into the sheriff's department and hand it all over, because evidence handed over by the suspect, no matter how clean it clears him, turns into a long, grinding legal process. And during that process, Marilyn lawyers up, goes quiet, and spends the next year and a half picking apart everything I'd built from the other direction. She was good at taking things apart. I understood that clearly now, so I did something a good deal simpler. On a Friday evening, while Marilyn sat out on the sun porch with her tea and that same worn paperback, the nerve of this woman, I sat at my kitchen table and sent 2 files from an email address she'd never seen to a phone number she wouldn't recognize. An audio clip and a photo of Denise Falk, alive and healthy in Scottsdale, holding up that morning's newspaper. No message, no name, no explanation needed. I shut the laptop, rinsed my coffee cup, and went up to bed. She came up about 40 minutes later. I watched through half-shut eyes as she stood in the bedroom doorway, a long moment, phone still in her hand, completely frozen. In 19 years of marriage, I had never once seen Marilyn Hensley stand fully still. She was always moving, straightening something, managing something. She stood in that doorway like a woman who'd heard a sound with no source she could point to. Good. The next morning I drove to Detective Voss's office and set Gordon Pruitt's full report down on her desk. The statement, the photographs, the financial records, the call logs, everything squared away in a plain manila folder, because I'm a tidy man by habit. Detective Voss read through it for close to 15 minutes without once looking up. "Mr. Hensley," she finally said. "Ellen," I said, "I think we both already know I didn't rent that storage unit." She looked at me a long moment, then reached for her phone. Marilyn was arrested on a Tuesday morning, cold enough that our breath showed in the driveway, on charges that ran from conspiracy to fraud to obstruction, 11 counts in all. She was walked out of our house in handcuffs at a little past 8. I watched from the porch. She looked back at me once, just the once, as the deputy walked her toward the car, and for the first time in 22 years I couldn't read a single thing behind her eyes. Couldn't find the calculation, couldn't locate the woman who'd studied me the way a forger studies somebody else's handwriting. She just looked at me, and I nodded. Because here's the thing Marilyn never once understood about me, the one miscalculation sitting right at the center of her whole careful plan. She spent years watching what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, how deep I slept at night. She never once bothered watching what I was thinking. At 64 years old, I'm not a man who makes speeches. I don't slam doors on my way out of a room. I don't need to have the last word in an argument. I just need the last move. She spent 19 years building me a cage, one careful brick at a time. I built her one in 16 days flat. Somewhere out there right now, Marilyn Hensley is looking over her shoulder for a ghost of her own making, a husband she was so certain she had figured out completely. She knew my signature better than I do. She never once knew my spine, and that, in the end, was always going to be the only mistake that mattered. If this one got to you, do me a favor and hit like. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know down in the comments what you'd have done in my shoes. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you next time.